A lot of new faces, folks I haven't met, so I'll just take a minute to tell you about myself. So I had no idea I was even going to be involved in politics. It was never in my mind. I was in the Army for 25 years. I did 2 tours Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. My retirement plan was to be a professor. I did my PhD in history at K-State. I had gotten a job at Wichita State, but it didn't start until the fall. And I had a lot of free time on my hands, and this is why you don't give me free time, because now I'm a state representative. That was not my life plan. But I'm in addition to being, I'm a professor at Wichita State University in the Homeland Security program, but I'm an historian, so I teach some history, and I teach some strategic studies, and then I teach some Homeland Security stuff. And me and my wife own a couple restaurants. I got a restaurant in Leavenworth, a restaurant in Manhattan, and we started COVID with 4, but now we're down to 2 because of workforce, but kind of right-sized now. But I went into the legislature, and they ask you what committees do you want to be on, and I put kind of the obvious things for somebody from Leavenworth. I put like corrections and military and veterans. And they put me on elections committee, and I'm like, why did they put me on elections committee? It's like I don't have a lot of experience with it. I had not asked for it, but I figured, well, gosh, if I'm going to be on the elections committee, I should probably know something about elections. So I went to the Secretary of State's office there in Memorial Hall, and I sat for a whole morning with his elections team, the Secretary of State's elections team. And just great professionals. They forgot more about elections than most people will ever know, and just great information. My brain kind of left hurting. But while I was in there, my phone was blowing up. I mean, just like text after text and message, and like, man, what's going on? And so after I walked out, I looked at my phone. And the day that I was in the Secretary of State's office to talk to the election officials was January 6, 2021. And while I had been in there talking to them, it kind of was a morning that turned into an afternoon, all the stuff that happened on January 6th was happening. And right there across the street on the south lawn of the Capitol, there was a Stop the Steal protest. And I know a lot of those folks, and I had initially planned, well, after I'm done at the Secretary of State's office, I'll walk across the street and I'll say hi to some of the people I know there. I decided to give it a pass that day. I figured that probably, maybe, not a good day to be out there. But the reason I tell that story is, if you don't think the Lord orders your steps, I had no idea that I was going to be on the elections committee. I had no idea that I was going to be involved with elections. And then the first day that I start learning about it, I walk out, and we have a ample demonstration of why it's so important, why our elections are so important, and why voter confidence is so important, why it's so important that people truly believe that the elections reflect their will. And we got a little sneak preview on January 6th of what it's going to look like all over the country if people stop trying to settle their differences at the ballot box, if people lose confidence that our elections are the way that we affect change in our country. However you feel about January 6th, I think we can all agree that those people really believe that the election had been stolen, and they were very angry about it. And I've lived places, served places overseas where people no longer settle their disputes with elections; they settle them with guns. I spent 25 years in the Army, defending our Constitution and our way of life and our form of government. I will die before I'll let that happen in communities in our country. And so it really impressed upon me just how important it is what we do with elections. So fast forward 2 years, I've been reelected. I've been on the committee, and I really have a passion for it, as you're about to find out because I'm going to bore the hell out of you about it. But I really have a passion for it. And when you come back for your second term, it's kind of time to start moving up into leadership. And they're like, hey, what do you want to do? Do you want to be this? Do you want to be that? I only ask for one thing. I want to be the chairman of the elections committee, because this is so important. This is so important. And by 2022, another university, not this university, had done a poll of Kansans, and half of Kansans said that they no longer believe that the results of the election reflect their will. That's unsustainable. That's unsustainable for a state. That's unsustainable for a country that uses representative government in order to, to operate. And so I wanted to be the chairman of the election committee because I wanted to have a role in restoring voter confidence. And what I've done with the committee in order to do that is two things. First, I've made my committee a platform for conversation on the topic, because for the last 5 years, we have not been having a conversation about elections. We've been shouting at each other. We've been yelling back and forth, calling each other names. We have not actually been having a conversation. So I've tried to turn my committee into a platform where people are forced to be civil. They get up, they get the time and the microphone, and the whole world's watching on YouTube and whatever, to make their case for their side of the issue. And then they're going to get challenged with questions by, the Republicans, by the Democrats on the committee. They're going to have to answer questions. They're going to have to defend their position. And that's something that hasn't been going on for years in this country. We've been calling each other, tinfoil hat wearing kooks, or, people wanting to steal elections. We're not talking to each other. We're shouting at each other. Sometimes in the committee, I'll hear a bill that I have absolutely no plan to move out of the committee, let alone get onto the floor, just so we can have a conversation. Like we had a bill that would have done runoff elections for governor if somebody didn't get 50%, because for the last few election cycles, the governor has won. Both parties, governors have won with less than 50%. So somebody had a bill that would have caused a runoff election. Well, if you've seen Georgia, you know what a terrible idea a runoff election is. But let's have the conversation, right? And people came in and talked about ranked choice voting. People came in and talked about, raising the bar for being an independent candidate. All kinds of different options. But we were having a conversation. So that's what I mean. But the other thing that I've tried to do with the committee is I have tried to find, and I'm going to use a military term because I'm a soldier at heart, high payoff targets, right? Things that we can do that are easy to do, don't make it harder to vote, but improve voter confidence. Because a lot of the things that you hear people say that are concerned that our elections are being stolen or aren't fair. I don't believe everything that they say, but they all kind of start from a premise. Like, we have no regulations in the state of Kansas for how drop boxes are put out or used or whatever. And so people start to think, well, golly, they're not very secure, because some of them are. Some of them are super secure. The drop box in Leavenworth County, there's a camera right on it. They take a picture of everybody putting a ballot in. But I've been all over the state talking to election officers, and I've seen drop boxes that are just like a slit in the side of the county courthouse where you can put your ballot, your property tax payment, or your application for a license plate. That's probably not secure, probably not as secure anyways. So people they have a concern about it because it is a vulnerability. And, sometimes they kind of blow it out of proportion. But if it's something we can fix, let's fix it, I just use that as an example. A lot of the things that I work on are these high payoff targets. These things are simple. We can fix a vulnerability. Not saying that vulnerability's been exploited, but, I'm a Homeland Security guy. You don't wait until after the bomb goes off to fix the vulnerability that caused the bomb to get snuck onto the plane, right? You fix the vulnerability so that you never have the bang. You get to the left of the boom, as we say in the Army. So that's what I've been working on in the Elections Committee. I'm going to talk about, hopefully not too long, but I'm going to talk about 4 measures that we've worked on this year. And then I'll just shut up and answer any questions you have. So one of the big voter confidence concerns right now, because I'm the elections chair, I get them all, right? Everybody emails me, everybody calls me, did you see this? Did you see that? One of the really big voter confidence concerns right now is the concern about non-citizens voting. And honestly, we tell people, oh, non-citizens, they're not voting in Kansas. The God's honest truth is we don't really know because we haven't been doing that much to check. But when I started digging into it, I discovered that it actually doesn't say anywhere in statute or in our Constitution that you have to be a citizen to vote. The people who wrote our Constitution all those years ago, it never occurred to them that you had to say that, right? It was kind of obvious, citizens vote, non-citizens don't vote. So they didn't actually write it in the Constitution. Instead, what they wrote in the Constitution was you can't prevent a citizen from voting if they're 18, if they live in the district, without due process of the law, right? So if you become a felon, you lose your right to vote until you've completed your sentence, and then you can apply to get your voting rights back. But otherwise, the Constitution says you can't prevent a citizen from voting. So this year I sponsored, we had 46 co-sponsors for a bill to plug that hole, right? Let's just put it in the Constitution that only citizens can vote. It seemed pretty obvious. It was pretty overwhelming. It's passed the House. It's over in the Senate now. It requires a 2/3 vote of both houses, and then after the 2/3 vote, it'll go to the ballot in November 2026 for y'all to vote on. And you vote for it, and then it'll be in the Constitution. God willing, you'll vote for it. I may come back and give another pitch for that when we get closer. But okay, now you've got it in the Constitution. You didn't really fix anything. All you did was make it clear that only citizens can vote. How are you going to enforce that, right? Well, when I started digging more, I found out that there's not a lot of data sharing inside the government to scrub our voter rolls to make sure that there are no non-citizens on our voter rolls. A lot of people don't know this, but you can get a driver's license if you're not a citizen, right? You just have to show up at the DMV, prove who you are with a birth certificate from wherever or something, or a passport from whatever country you're from, and proof that you're in the country legally. And then they give, that could be my resident alien card saying that I've been in America for 10 years, or that could be the little paper you get when you show up from the country after you plugged into the CBP1 app to come into the country from Nicaragua or wherever, right? And so they have the data. The DMV, because when you show those documents, they scan those documents in, and they record all of that, and they know who's a citizen and who's not a citizen. And oh yeah, by the way, because of the National Voter Registration Act, every state's a motor voter state. So while you're at the DMV, they're going to ask you, do you want to vote? Or do you want to register to vote, right? And you're going to, you might be thinking, say, well, golly, of course, if they just took your evidence showing that you weren't a citizen, they're not going to ask you. I met a guy who's a legal resident of the United States from Australia, and they asked him if he wanted to register to vote after they had just taken all of his stuff. DMV workers, they get tired, they lose track of who they're talking to or whatever, and they make mistakes. He obviously said, I don't think I'm allowed to do that, but imagine somebody who's in the country who speaks English as a second language or barely speaks English. They might not understand the question they're being asked, and they might just say yes to everything they're asked. So there is it's not completely beyond the realm of possibility that some non-citizen might end up on the voter rolls. So let's go look, right? Let's look and see if the people that we know are non-citizens are on the voter rolls. Well, the Secretary of State's, this Secretary of State and previous Secretary of State have had the same idea. It's not like a novel, it's not like an outlandish idea, but the problem is they can't always get the DMV to cooperate, because it's work for the DMV to go make a list of these are the non-citizens and give it to the Secretary of State. So in the last 15 years, that's only actually happened 15 times, or I'm sorry, 6 times in 15 years. 6 times. And it just happened in November, this last November, and when we were debating the bill on the floor, people, they spent all this money looking for non-citizens and found one person. Well, Secretary of State's office found 80 people. Last time they checked the voter rolls, they found 80 people, and they have evidence that 20 of those people actually voted. Non-citizens voted in an election. Now, they're still investigating it. That number could go down. It could be that the person was a non-citizen when they got their driver's license, but since then they've been naturalized, you know, but it could also be that they're non-citizens and they voted. So we have a bill. We passed it through the House. It's just been heard in the Senate committee. It's going to go to the floor that would quarterly require the DMV to provide this list. And then the Secretary of State's office would make sure that, you know, check the list against the voter rolls. And if they find somebody that has the same name, obviously there's more than one John Smith in Kansas, they check the name, and they're also going to have the birth date, the address, the social security number, and if they have one, an alien registration number. So they're going to have all those things to check to try to make sure that it's the same person. And if it is the same person, they'll send the name to the county clerk, you know, where that person lives, because they can't remove names from the voter rolls themselves. Only a county clerk can do that because we have a bottom-up election system. So they will send that name to the election clerk, and then the election clerk will tell the voter, hey, I am removing you because we believe you're a non-citizen, and remove them from the voter rolls. Now there's a ton of due process in it because, you know, mistakes happen. The guy can come in with proof they're a citizen, get put back in the voter rolls, or if all else fails and they forget, you know, they don't see the notice that they're being removed and they go to vote and they're not, you know, they say they're not in the voter rolls, they can vote a provisional ballot, and then they got another 2 weeks to go, you know, so there's to go prove they're a citizen, and their vote will get counted. So there's a ton of due process in it, just so we make sure that we're not, you know, kicking somebody off the voter rolls who should have the right to vote, because you don't want to do that. The last thing kind of in this area of like kind of foreign influence on our elections is there's a loophole in Kansas law and in federal law. So federal law says that whether you're running for dog catcher or you're running for president of the United States, you cannot take money from a foreign national, somebody who's not a citizen of the United States, for your campaign. But there is nothing in state statute or federal statute that prevents somebody who is campaigning for or against a constitutional amendment to take foreign money. And this is not a hypothetical. In 2022, during the Value Them Both campaign, the pro-abortion groups that were running campaign ads against Value Them Both, they took $1.6 million in foreign money from one guy. He's a Swiss billionaire who invests in all these different constitutional amendment campaigns. And actually, we're one of the lower ones at 1.6 million, because over in Missouri, they have ballot initiatives where they can do a campaign to get signatures to get a constitutional amendment question on the ballot. And he spends a ton of money over there and a ton of money in those states. He only spent 1.6 million here to stop Value Them Both. I don't know about you. I don't think that foreigners should be deciding our elections, whether it's for a constitutional amendment or for a candidate. So we've got a bill that bans foreign money from constitutional amendment campaigns, and that's we've passed it in the House. It's over in the Senate. I think it's going to be on the floor next week. The final thing I'll talk about before I shut up and start answering questions is the 3-day grace period. So a lot of people don't know this, but back in 2017, Kansas passed a law that says that we will keep taking your ballots, your mail-in ballots, for 3 days after the election. So if your ballot shows up in the mail, you know, on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday after Election Day, it's still going to get counted. Sort of. And that's why we're passing a law to repeal it. First, you know, when I first heard about this, when I first started getting into this and getting interested in it, for me it was about voter confidence, right? Because nothing undermines voter confidence like a vote count that changes for 3 days after the election. So on election night, this guy won, and then this guy won, and then that guy won again, right? That's terrible for voter confidence. There were actually a couple races in Johnson County in 2020 that the one person won on election night, and between the mail-in ballots and the provisional ballots, lost 2 weeks later when they had the canvass. That is not good for voter confidence. That's like the opposite of good for voter confidence. So that's what got me interested in it. But then I started talking to election officers, because I go around, I've been all over the state talking to clerks and county and election commissioners in the bigger counties that run elections. And what I heard over and over again is get rid of the 3-day grace period, because we're getting ballots on during this period and we can't count them because they're not postmarked. So in the law, for your ballot to be counted, it has to have a postmark. If it doesn't have a postmark, we don't know if you voted before or after Election Day. And the Constitution of the United States says Election Day is the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, right? So if you didn't, if you don't have a postmark, there's no evidence that you voted on Election Day or before. And so we don't count them. So once I started hearing this, we tried to repeal it once and it failed. But once I started hearing this from election officers, I'm like, okay, now this isn't just kind of a philosophical debate about voter confidence. We're lying to Kansas voters. We're telling them that we'll count your ballot if it shows up in the 3-day period, but we ain't, because they're showing up without postmarks, a lot of them. And so I gave it another shot. We came close, but we didn't have a veto-proof majority. But I kept saying, because I had talked to so many election officers, I got the Secretary of State to, in the 2024 election, count how many ballots aren't counted because they're missing a postmark. And I told people from the well back in April of 2024, before the election, when that number comes in, it's going to be a big damn number. And then you're going to wish that you'd passed this now so that we hadn't disenfranchised all those voters. Well, the Secretary of State did count. And it turns out that in the primary election, 2% of the ballots, the mail-in ballots that were cast, didn't get counted because they didn't have a postmark. It's like one in 3 ballots wasn't counted that showed up during that 3-day grace period. So we hit, with that additional ammunition and a little bit stronger supermajority, we were able to pass it with a veto-proof majority in the House. And then in the Senate today, while I was on my way here, I was listening to it on YouTube because I'm an election geek, they voted the bill on the floor of the Senate, and it got a veto-proof majority over there. So it's going to the governor. She's definitely going to veto it, but I think we've got the votes to override. At least we do right now, unless somebody flips their vote. So that will go away. And we added in the House Elections Committee, because the people make valid points. Even the people I don't agree with make valid points. And somebody made the point that, well, there's no time in here to educate voters. So voters think there's a 3-day grace period and there ain't going to be one. So we actually moved the implementation of the law to 2026, so for the January 2026. So election officers in the Secretary of State's office will have a whole year to educate voters before the law goes into effect. So those are the big things. Of course, there's a lot of, my committee also oversees campaign finance law, but I'm not going to bore you with that. It's really interesting to me, but it's probably boring as hell to everybody else. But if you want to talk about it, I would be happy to talk about it, questions and answers. But those are the big election things that are going on in the elections committee right now. So I'm going to stop there and answer any questions you have. Yeah, please.
Okay, so for this question is, how are ballots being mailed without a postmark?
Okay, that's a good question. So there's nothing requiring the post office to postmark a ballot. The postmark is actually to cancel a stamp, right? And a lot of counties, they do paid postage on their mail-in ballots. And so there's really no reason for the post office to postmark the ballot but when they get it before they send it out. And so then that's what's happening. Something I heard on the floor when we were debating was, well, this bill, this repeal of the 3-day grace period is going to disproportionately impact rural voters. Well, the 3-day grace period disproportionately negatively impacts rural voters because the small post offices are more likely to not postmark a ballot that doesn't need a postmark than a big city post office, because big city post offices have more people. You know, a lot of times rural post office is like one person, right? You know, and everybody else is out delivering mail. So yeah, that's how that happens.
So this one says, in a recently leaked video, you said you wanted to get rid of early voting.
Okay.
But today you mentioned wanting to make voting more accessible. How do you plan on doing this?
So we're talking about the Kansas reflector and loud light. I would encourage you to actually watch the video and see what I said. Not the loud light video, which cut up the video and made it look like what they wanted it to say. But I'll just say this, and I'll stand by what I said in the actual video, not in the edited video. In a perfect world, everybody would vote on Election Day. In a perfect world, the only people who would mail in vote were, you know, college students who were away from home, military, and disabled people. And everybody else would go in person to vote because they're physically able to go in person to vote. But I don't live in the perfect world. I live in the real world. I live in the real world where sometimes people are working on Election Day because it's not a holiday, and even if it were a holiday, police and firemen and all the people that don't get a day off wouldn't be able to vote. You know, in the real world, sometimes people, you know, are going to be traveling on Election Day, and so they have to vote early. So and people have gotten used to that convenience, and I understand it's not going anywhere. So the trick is, how do we make it secure? How do we make mail-in voting secure? How do we make early voting, which, you know, is pretty much as secure as in-person voting? How do we make sure those methods of voting are just as secure as voting on Election Day in person, which in my mind is the ideal?
How does refusing to count legitimate mail-in ballots increase voter confidence? Just educate voters.
Okay.
How do we get part of our work?
So I'm not sure what legitimate ballots we're not counting. The law says that your ballot has to be postmarked because the Kansas or the U.S. Supreme Court and several district courts have said that states do not have the power to change the date of Election Day. There was a Fifth Circuit decision on Mississippi here last year about their 3-day grace period, and they rolled the whole darn thing unconstitutional, even though they did have the postmark requirement in it, because Election Day is Election Day, and that's what the judge said. Election Day is Election Day. It's right there in the Constitution. First Tuesday after the first Monday, you're not allowed to add days. And they considered even the 3-day grace period adding days. So we can repeal it now and take a year to educate voters, or we can wait until a court overturns it, and then it'll go into effect immediately, and voters will just have to figure it out. I prefer the former rather than the latter. Yeah.
So this one says, what does the voter education process look like?
Well, so that's a great question. We are every state's different. You know, the Constitution says that the administration of elections is the role of the states. And you do not want the federal government in charge of your elections, because every time they get involved, they screw it up. Like, for instance, the reason that we couldn't add a citizenship check at the beginning when people registered to vote, when they had plenty of time long before the election, is because the MVRA, the National Voter Registration Act, has a list of things that you can ask for, and that list doesn't include proof of citizenship. So a court said, no, you can't do that. So that's what happens when federal government gets involved in election law. And I want to take a side here, and I promise I'll get back to the question, but there's a law before Congress, a bill before Congress right now, the U.S. Congress. It's called the SAVE Act. Has anybody heard of it? Okay, yeah. So the SAVE Act, it sounds really good. If you're on my side of the aisle, it sounds really good. It mandates voter ID, and it mandates proof of citizenship when you register. It sounds like, okay, those are two obvious things, right? Well, I would just say the devil is in the details, right? Whenever the federal government gets involved in every state's election, there are unintended consequences. I could stand here and bore you forever about all of the different federal laws on voting that have unintentionally created problems with our voting process. So, but to get back to your question, what does voter education look like? in Kansas, the counties run our elections. The Secretary of State is the senior election official, but the counties are the ones that actually run the elections. And there's very few regulations from the Secretary of State's office. He can only regulate what we say, Secretary of State, you have the authority to regulate X. Otherwise, it's state statute, whatever that county does. So the short answer to your question is, voter education looks different in all 105 counties. It's tailored by that elected official who runs the elections, the clerk in that county, unless it's one of the 4 biggest counties that have a commissioner. And it's paid for by that county, so the taxpayers decide, through their elected representatives on the county commission, I'm willing to pay this much for, voter education through their vote, and that's what it looks like in that county. So it's kind of impossible to answer for all of Kansas, if that makes sense.
This one says, why shouldn't we let non-citizens vote? Don't our laws impact their lives as well?
Citizenship's got to mean something. I mean, what does it mean to be a U.S. citizen if even a non-citizen can vote? I mean, what's left? If and this is you think I'm extreme about this? If that's what you think, my wife is a naturalized American citizen. She is mad. She is mad when she saw the video of me on the floor saying that 20 non-citizens might have voted. She was like, "What? You need to stop that now." I'm like, well, I'll have you come give the next speech, to the House. I mean, because she had to go through a lot. She was born in Thailand. She immigrated from Thailand to West Berlin, got a visa from West Berlin to the United States, and had to wait in line for years and years. And when she tried to become a citizen, she was married to me, and we had to move from Hawaii to California with an army move, and they lost all her crap, and she had to start all over. She is even more adamant than me that citizenship should mean something, because it's so hard to get if you're not born here and a citizen. We sort of take it for granted, and it being able to see it through her eyes, to me, just reinforces how important it is. Do a card.
This one says...
There's cards over there.
Oh, sure.
Okay, yeah.
This one says, 3-day grace period largely exists because of government inefficiency with the USPS. How do you and the Elections Committee plan on mitigating this?
Well, so the reason that we're repealing the 3-day grace period is because we have no control over the post office, right? The post office is a pseudo-federal agency, and we're a state government. Because the USPS is not doing what we would like them to do. I mean, if I could pass a law that would have any effect on the Postal Service that said, you shall postmark every ballot clearly with the date and the time, we might be able to live with the 3-day grace period. I still wouldn't like it very much, because I think it also impacts voter confidence, but it wouldn't be a problem. But we don't get to do anything with the post office. 32 other states. It was 28 last time I tried to pass it, now it's 32. 32 other states have already determined that the best way to fix this postmark problem is to just stop taking ballots on election night. And that's what they do. So if we join that list of states as Kansas, it'll be a cool 2/3 of states in the union that stop taking mail-in ballots on election night.
This one says, do you think the 2020 election was stolen?
It wasn't stolen in Kansas. It wasn't stolen in Kansas, okay? Our Kansas elections, no election is perfect because they're run by people, but our election here in Kansas was not stolen. But it doesn't matter if people don't believe that, right? You could have the most safe and secure elections in the world, and it wouldn't matter if people didn't believe they were safe and secure. And so that's what I'm focused on, is making sure people believe it.
This one says, how common do you think illegals commit voter fraud?
We don't know. We don't know because we're barely checking. We've checked 6 times in 15 years, right? So we don't know. We had this debate on the floor, and Democrat after Democrat got up and said, there's no evidence, there's no, that Chris Kobach tried to this and this number or that number got caught. If we pass this law through the Senate and it becomes law, and I'm not going to be surprised if the governor signs it, because we did it. We just did it. She approved of it and let it happen. So I'm not sure she's going to veto it. But if we do that every quarter, if every quarter we take take the new people who are non-citizens who got a driver's license and we compare it to the people on the voter roll, and we never find a non-citizen who is on the voter roll, that is a positive result. Because we can tell Kansans with confidence, hey, we looked, we checked, and there are no non-citizens on the voter roll, so there's no non-citizens voting. That's the purpose of the law, is to make sure it's not happening. So I don't know, and anybody who tells you they know how many non-citizens are voting is lying to your face, because we haven't checked. We checked one time in the last, I don't know, I don't want to lie, I don't know how long it's been between that November check and the one before that, but I do know we've only checked 6 times in 15 years. So.
This one says, do you think it's easier to vote illegally via mail-in ballot or through the drop box?
Well, a mail-in ballot goes in the drop box, so and they're the same ballot. I'll tell you, there are all kinds of shenanigans that happen with mail-in voting, and most of them are completely legal right now, right? And we closed some loopholes. I was proud to be part of the effort to do some things to combat this. But in the 2020 and the 2022 election both, the 2022 election more because of the value of the both amendment, but definitely in the 2020 election, these groups from outside of Kansas, these Democrat-leaning groups with tons of money, they found voters in Kansas who don't usually vote. They're registered to vote, but they don't usually vote. They're what you call low propensity voter. But using AI and pattern matching and big data, they were relatively sure these people, if they voted, they would vote Democrat. And then they inundated them with mail-in ballot requests over and over and over until they filled one out, right? They just keep sending them ballot requests until they got sick of receiving them and finally filled one out. And then that's public data, right? When you request a mail-in ballot, everybody on the planet knows you requested a mail-in ballot. All you got to do is go to the county clerk. They have to give you the data because it's public information. And so these groups knew which voters to watch for, and they watched for those voters to request a ballot. And then they knew a mail-in ballot was coming to them because it's also public information when the mail-in ballot goes out to that person. And this happened in my district. This is not a hypothetical. I watched it happen in my district. It's 20 days before the election, or actually it's probably 18 days before the election because the mail-in ballots went out 20 days before the election. 18 days before the election, you know, I'm out knocking doors. I'm a door knocker, man. I'm a prolific door knocker. I knock every door, you know, that for anybody I think might potentially vote for me. And I'm out knocking on doors, and I'm knocking high propensity voters, right? Because you got to be efficient. I'm knocking the doors of the people who vote, you know, at least once in a while. There's all these other, you know, there's all these other people who live in the neighborhood. They're registered to vote, but they don't vote. And so I didn't knock any other doors. But I'm walking through neighborhoods, and all of a sudden there's all these kids in my neighborhood. These, you know, these young adults, and that look a lot like y'all. And they're going through our neighborhood, and they're knocking all the doors that I didn't knock because they know there's a mail-in ballot there because they sent them, you know, some company that they work for sent them the ballot request or some organization they work for. And they're harvesting the ballots. They're going to the door. Hey, I think there's something in your mailbox. You want to check? Hey, look, it's a ballot. Who would have guessed? Would you like help filling it out? Would you like me to take it to the drop box or to the county clerk for you? And they'd take them all. They'd, you know, go in with their big stack of ballots and they'd turn them in. That's ballot harvesting, and it's 100% legal in the state of Kansas. No law was broken. So was the election stolen? Well, if it was stolen, it's stolen fair and square, right? They followed the rules, and they industrially engineered votes. People who would have never voted, they found them using AI. They sent them the request. They went and got the ballot, and they turned it in. They industrially manufactured votes. So some crazy things in law that we've been able to fix on this issue. First, did you know, before we passed a law, the candidate could help you fill out your ballot and take in your ballot. Now, if I went to the polling place with my Pat Proctor for Kansas t-shirt, and I walked into the polling booth with you, I threw my arm around you, hey, you want me to help you fill that out? You want me to stick it in the machine for you? That would be a crime. That's called electioneering. But if the ballot's at your house, I could have done all that. I could have sat on your couch and filled out your ballot at your coffee table and then taken it in. Well, you can't anymore. It's illegal now. We've passed a law. That's illegal. But we also are trying to combat this kind of, like I said, this industrial production of votes, where just a handful of people can ballot harvest hundreds of votes. I mean, in my district, I'm in one of the toughest districts in the state for Republican. I'm the first Republican re-elected there since 1994, and I just did the three-peat. So tough district. I won my first election by 7%, which was like 400 some votes in my district, because I've got Fort Leavenworth, so it's in the penitentiary, so it's a really low turnout. I won the second election by only 166 votes, and then I won my re-election this time by like 300 something, which is like 6%. 200 ballots is an afternoon of ballot harvesting. If you've done it right, 200 votes. I mean, so you got to figure, if I hadn't harvested in my district, because it's a nationally targeted seat, if they hadn't harvested my district, I might have had another 7% win. But because they did do that, my percentage went way down. Luckily, the people still gave me the trust to continue to serve them even after that. But it's something else we did to combat ballot harvesting is now you can only turn in 10 ballots that aren't your own. I don't know why. If it was up to me, it would be like 1 or 0. But we had to bring 84 votes along in the House and 27 votes along in the Senate. So 10 was the number that we could get the votes on to do it, because we had to override a veto clearly. The challenge is enforcing that, and we had a measure last year that, because we put in law only 10 people could turn in a ballot, but we didn't really say it, and election officer, it's your job to count. So some of the election officers are like, I don't have time to do that. The county attorneys are like, I'm not getting involved with that. So we got to put in statute how to enforce it, and we'll probably get back to that.
This one says, do you think Kansas should ban ranked choice voting like Missouri did?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm going to be, tomorrow morning at 9 in the morning, I'm having a special committee meeting because we've got a handful of ballot bills to finish, and one of them is, it's either Senate Bill 5 or Senate Bill 6. I always mix them up, but I think it's Senate Bill 5, could be 6, is banning ranked choice voting. Absolutely. And people say, well, it's not happening here, that's so silly, why are you wasting time? I've had a lot of Kansas advocates in my committee that think ranked choice voting is the best thing since sliced bread. So does everybody know what that is? So ranked choice, if you don't know what it is, ranked choice voting, instead of going in and voting for the person you want, you vote for this is the person I want most, this is the person I want second most, and this is the person I want third most. Well, if you're really asking me who I want that guy 3 times, I don't want those other people, but you're making me vote for those other people. And, depending on, if like the top 2 people, they get a certain number of, 1% or of, top votes, but it's not enough to be a majority, they go to the next one. It's entirely possible that the person that everybody wanted second and nobody wanted first could end up the elected official. That's insane. Okay, that is like, if I cannot think of a quicker way to destroy voter confidence than give everybody the person that they voted second. I mean, so it's got to go, and we've got to build them in.
This one says, what states do you think have the best model for Kansas to follow in order to have more secure elections?
I think we're one of the best. America First Policy Institute, which is Donald Trump's think tank, they rank us in the top 8 in the country on election security. I think that this 3-day grace period is one of those things that probably keeps us from being in the top 5 that we could fix. I also think that we need to do something with drop boxes. There's no appetite in the state to ban them. The people that use them love them, and it's a lot of people, especially in the big counties. But right now we have no rules for them. There's no regulations at all. And in fact, some people question whether it's even in statute that you can do it. They're kind of turning the statute sideways and reading it again to say, okay, that means I can have a remote ballot box. Let's put it in statute. Yes, you can have one, but the Secretary of State's going to set regulations and everybody has to follow them. So I think if we did that, I think that would be another way that we could kind of raise our rankings. But we are one of the most secure states in the country. I mean, out in California, they're not even allowed to look at your ID if you try to show it to them when you go to vote, right? Not only can they not ask you for your ID, but if you try to show it, they have to like avert their eyes because they're not allowed to look at your ID when you go to vote. I mean, that's insane. And I think it's Nevada and maybe Oregon or Washington has all mail-in voting. Like there isn't a polling place you can go to if you wanted to vote in person. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. So yeah.
This one says, does it not disenfranchise more votes to get rid of the grace period instead of just educating on the need to postmark or require a post to postmark?
Is it better for us to try to get the post office to be better, which the federal government has been unable to do for 200 years, or is it better for us to just change the rules so that the post office can't disenfranchise voters? I think the second solution is better, and so that's, yeah. And the other thing about that question is it assumes that Kansas voters are done. It assumes that if you tell them that the rules are changing, we're no longer going to keep taking your ballot for 3 days after the election, that they're not smart enough to adjust their behavior and get their ballot in earlier. And I would submit the following as evidence that that's not true. Before 2017, this comes from the Secretary of State's office the first time we tried to repeal 3-day grace period. Before the 2017 law that created the 3-day grace period, about 2,000 ballots would show up after Election Day and couldn't be counted. Now that we have a 3-day grace period, about 2,000 ballots show up after the 3-day grace period. So that tells me that people are taking 3 more days because they've got 3 more days to take, right? Have you ever heard there's it's kind of like an adjunct to Murphy's Law. It's called Pickering's Law. It says that work expands to fill available space. The kind of colloquial version of that is if you wait to the last minute, it only takes a minute, right? So if you give people 3 extra days, they're going to take 3 extra days. If you tell them you don't have those 3 extra days, they're smart. Kansas voters are smart. They will adjust their behavior and they'll get their ballot in earlier.
What are your thoughts on making voting mandatory?
I don't want everybody to vote. I've had some people I don't want to vote. No, that's going on video. I grew up in a time, way before y'all, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, and we were always taught when we were growing up that voting is a duty and it's also a responsibility. It's a duty in that, as an American, we have a representative form of government. It is your duty to get out and vote, but it's a responsibility for you to know the rules, understand the rules, and follow the rules. And if you don't take the responsibility to find out how you register to vote, find out where you vote, and find out how to vote and when, then you failed in your responsibility to execute your duty. And that's kind of where I'm at. It should be easy to vote. I'm not trying to say that it shouldn't be, that it should be so turgid and complex that nobody knows how to do it, but there's a responsibility there.
This one says, are you happy that it was so hard for your wife to gain citizenship?
No, because I heard about it every night. I'm not. I mean, I think that, I don't think that it should just be like an automatic thing. I think that, I think that you should have to demonstrate some basic, and I don't know, has anybody got any relatives that are naturalized American citizens? Anybody, or know anybody that's ever had to get naturalized? It's a process, right? You have to apply. You have to prove you are who you are and you're in the country legally and all that. But then you got to take a test. And it's funny, we tried to add as a graduation requirement from Kansas K through 12 education that you had to pass the same test. And oh my God, you would have thought we were telling schools that they had to, come and teach naked or something. I mean, they were just screaming bloody murder that they had to teach kids the same civics facts, like, what are the 3 branches of government? When is election day? That stuff that's on that test, they just thought, oh my God, it's so outrageous that you would require us to teach Americans this stuff. But we require that of people who want to become citizens. And then you have to do an interview, and you have to, I mean, it is it's a complicated process. Now, anything involving the federal government is going to be twice as complicated as it needs to be. I acknowledge that, and they're not very efficient. And like I said, I got moved from Schofield Barracks, Hawaii to Fort Irwin, California, and they lost her whole packet. She had to start over. And then after she started over, they found her old packet, and then they you tried to apply twice. It was like it's a big mess. But I'll tell you, I'm going to try to do this without getting teared up, but one of the most profound moments in my life, two very profound moments in my life. First was I was there with my wife in Los Angeles when she took the oath of office and registered to vote. And that was just so moving. I mean, we were all bawling. I mean, I tear up just thinking about it. And then the other moving thing about her naturalization, she never told me why, now, because when we got married, she was a legal resident, with a long-term visa, green card, and at some point after we got married, she just decided to become a citizen. But she just said one day she walked in and goes, "I'm going to become a citizen." I'm like, "Okay, yes, dear," and I got her the form, right? She never really explained why that was the day. Years and years later, when I was in politics, the Leavenworth County Republican women asked her to come speak and tell her story. And she was terrified about it. Obviously English is a second language for her. She was afraid she was going to say something wrong or whatever. There wasn't a dry eye in that room when she gave that speech, when she talked about her life and all the things that she had to go through to get to America and to become an American. But what really moved me, the reason that she decided to become a citizen was 9/11. And she said when she watched the planes go in the tower and she was hearing the count of the dead, she realized they had attacked her country. I get goosebumps every time. I mean, it just, and I tell that because it just goes to how much commitment goes into being an American citizen. And the idea that we just let anybody vote, they're subject to the laws too. They should be able to vote too. What does it mean to be a citizen? Let's just forget about it. Let's just, everybody just come on in. Everybody, you're American. Just walk across the border. Now you're American, because citizenship doesn't matter. Anybody can vote. I mean, it's just that it either means something or it doesn't. It either means something to be an American. I mean, this. I'm sorry. Now you got me on a soapbox. This country is unique in the history of the world. We are a multi-ethnic, multi-sectarian nation. Those used to be oxymorons, right? When you're a nation, you are a people with a common language and a common, common religion and a common history and a common ethnicity. That was a nation. And those guys over there were another nation. We're a nation of people from every ethnicity, every religion, every kind of belief. And what makes us a nation is we all believe in some principles, some simple principles. That we have the God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that we're all equal under the law. That's what makes us a people. Isn't that amazing? I mean, to me, that's amazing. And to be a part of the nation, you got to be a citizen. You can be a guest of the country, but if you want to be a citizen, you've got to go through the work, and then you have to swear that you believe in those principles. Then we'll make you a citizen. Then you'll get the right to vote. Okay, I'm off my soapbox.
This one says, what do you think of President Trump seeking more negotiations with the Russian Federation?
Again, your state representative. So I was a soldier for 25 years. I had I have 3 masters, one in strategy, one in theater operations, and then one in strategic studies, right? I teach one of the classes I teach at Wichita State. It's in the honors program. It's called Strategic Studies War, but I'm an historian and I could teach it however I wanted. So I teach it as the history of warfare as a component of national strategy, from people clubbing each other with rocks and sticks to nuclear war and today. Wars only end in 2 ways. Either one side so completely decimates the other side that they no longer have the ability militarily to resist, or the 2 parties or the multiple parties involved sit down at a table, make an agreement that nobody really likes, but they're willing to live with, because the alternative is one of them gets crushed so badly that they no longer have the will to resist. Okay? I've been in a war zone 4 times. I was in Iraq twice, Afghanistan once, and then I was in Jordan when Iraq when ISIS invaded Iraq and ended up, helping the Jordanian army through that. War is just horrific. Whether it's an insurgency and people are getting killed 2 or 3 at a time, or it's Ukraine war and people are getting killed by the bucket loads. It's just horrific. It destroys countries, it destroys cities, it destroys people, it destroys their lives. Even if they survive, even if they're not wounded externally, there's internal wounds that you carry to your grave. And not just the soldiers. Not just the soldiers, it's also the people in those countries. I don't know why I'm answering this question. But, so it's going to end with Russia killing every single Ukrainian with the ability to resist. And make no mistake, all you got to do is line up all the Ukrainians on the planet and all the Russians on the planet, and there's a whole bunch more of the Russians that are Ukrainians. And this is important enough to Putin for his own personal survival that there is nothing he is not willing to do to not lose. So he will keep killing until there are no Ukrainians left to resist him. And if it gets too tough and he's about to lose, he's going to start shooting nukes, tactical nukes. And then it's a whole new ballgame, because NATO can't just sit there. Even if he doesn't shoot the nukes at NATO, they can't just sit there while Russia's shooting nukes at anybody. So the only other way this ends is for everybody to sit down and talk. And, I watch the news like everybody else, and they're like, Trump's a Russian stooge, he's going to give up the whole thing, yada, yada, yada. We could not have a better negotiator. There's not a better negotiator on planet Earth in any domain than Trump. And I'll just remind y'all, because, Americans, we have short memories. 2017, if you turned on the same news and watched the same people that are saying that Donald Trump's going to surrender to Putin and give him whatever he wants because he wants to be his best buddy or something, those are the same people that were saying that Donald Trump was going to start a war with North Korea. You remember that? We're going to war with North Korea. I was in South Korea. I was on an exercise in South Korea, and I had always heard that the South Koreans kind of don't like us and resent us. They loved me. Man, they all wanted to hug me when I was there because they thought they were going to go to war too. But what happened? He negotiated an agreement with North Korea that nobody else has ever been able to get. Of course, it all blew up as soon as he left because, the next president's like, whatever Trump did is bad, I'm going to undo it. But just, I would caution everybody to not panic and go nuts and just, wait for diplomacy to work. But there you go. Okay. Well, I could talk all night. I didn't come from Leavenworth. I came from Topeka, which is 2.5 hours away, and I got to go back. I'd like to hang out for a while and talk kind of one-on-one with folks if you want to talk to me, or if you want to go over to the Turning Point thing because they're cooler than me, that's fine too. But I'm going to hang out, but I really appreciate the invitation, and anytime you want me to come back, I'll bore the hell out of you all over again, okay?
Guarantee
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.